Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final talk in our series on recognizing impermanence. So tonight, Bhante Suddhaso will be sharing some, maybe not final words on impermanence ever, but for this retreat. But we'll begin by chanting the Ratana Sutta, which we've been doing for the past few months. And then Bhante will lead us in some guided meditation, then share some words of Dhamma. And if at any time you have questions, feel free to type them into the live chat and we will address them at the end of the talk. And welcome to Jens and Melinda. Thanks for joining in. And thank you to everyone else who's also watching. So we'll start with the Ratana Sutta.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Yani dhabhutani samagatani bummani vayani va antaleke. Sabeva bhuta sumana bhavantu atopi sakacha sunantu bhasitam. Tasmahi bhutani sameta sabbe metang harota manusiya pataya. Divacharato chaharanti eva ling tasmahi nerakata apamatta. Yang kinchivitang idavahuram vasake suvayam ratanang panitang. Nano samangati tathagatena idampi buddhe ratanang panitang. Etena sachena suvati hotu. Kayang viragam amatang panitang yadachaga sakyamuni samadhito. Natena dhammena samati kinchi edampi dhamme ratanam panitang. Etena sachena suvati hotu. Yang Buddha seto parivannai suching samadhi manantarikan yamahu. Samadhina tena samona vijjati dampi dhamme ratanam panitang. Etena sachena suvati hotu. Ye bhungala tasatang pasatha chatari dhani yugani honti. Te dakineya sugata sasabhaka te sudinnani mahapalani. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Ye supayuta manasa dalhena nekameno gotamasa sanamhi. Te patipata amatam vigaya laddamudanim putim punjamana. Idampi sanghe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Yatinda kilo pataving sito siya chatu vivate via sampakampiyo. Tatu pamang sapurisang vadami yo arya satchani aveksha pasati. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Ye ariya sachani vibhavayanti gambhira panyena sudesitani. Kinchapi te honti pusapamata na te bhavanga tamanga diyanti. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Sahava sadasana sampadaya tayasu dhamma jahita bhavanti. Sakaya diti vichike chitancha silam vatam vapi yadati kinchi. Chatu abaye cha vipamuto cha cha vidanani abhavokatum. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Kinchapi sokam mankaroti papakam kayena vacha uracheta sava. Avambo sota sapati chadaya pambata dirtapata savuta. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Vanavagumbe yata pusidage gemmanamase patamasmin gemhe. Tatupamang dhammavarangade sayine Vanagaming paramang hidaya. Idampi buddhe ratanang panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Varo varanyo varado varaharo anuttaro dhamma varangade sayi. Idampi buddhe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Kinam puranang navam nati sambhavam virata citta yatike bhavasmin. Te kina bija virulhi chanda nimbanti dirayatayam paripo. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitang etena sachena suvati hotu. Yani da bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantareke. Tathagatam deva manusapujitam buddhang namasama suvati hotu. Yani da buddhani samagatani bummani vayani vantareke. Tathagatam deva manusapujitam dhammam namasama suvati hotu. Yani da buddhani samagatani bummani vayani vantareke. Tathagatam deva manusapujitam sangham namasama suvati hotu. Etena sacha vanjena dukkha upasamentu te. Etena sacha vanjena vaya upasamentu te. Etena sacha vanjena roga upasamentu te. Okay, so you can get in meditation posture. If you're capable of sitting in full lotus, of course, you should sit in full lotus. If you're not capable of full lotus, stop telling yourself that and start stretching, and someday you will be. But in the meantime, you can sit in whatever posture is doable for you. But don't bother to try to find a comfortable posture, because there's no such thing. We're just trying to look for a steady posture, an upright posture. When you're settled into position, take 2 or 3 long, slow, deep breaths. With each exhalation, letting the body and mind relax. And settle the mind in the body, picking some place in the body to be the center point of your attention. And from that center point, keeping a broad, open awareness of the whole sensory domain, the entire domain of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And whatever comes before the mind in each moment, recognize it as impermanent, ephemeral, insubstantial. So that's it. That's the method we'll be using for the next few minutes. Nothing complicated, just this. Whatever appears before the mind, whatever moves through the mind, just know it as impermanent, insubstantial. Sight is impermanent. Sound is impermanent. Smell is impermanent. Taste is impermanent. Touch is impermanent. Thought is impermanent. Okay, release your posture.
All right. Thank you, Bhante. And welcome to some more friends joining in. Miguel, Bhavani, Bobby, Art, who says good morning. So I assume Art is on the other side of the world. As well as Mark saying greetings. Okay, so at this time, we'll listen to some words of Dhamma from Bhante. And again, at any time, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the live chat and we will address them at the end of the talk.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good evening, friends. Good morning to Art and whoever else is joining from the other side of the globe. So, at this point, I don't actually have much left to say. I've already said pretty much everything that really needs to be said in the previous 5 talks. And there's a saying in Zen which comes to mind fairly often for me. Too many words. That's the saying. The Zen saying. Too many words. That's it. So I think of that whenever I start talking too much. I'm like, oh, too many words. Too many words. And what this is pointing to is the fact that often when we get caught up in the words, we miss the underlying meaning. And we just keep saying more and more and more words and getting farther and farther and farther from the direct experience that those words are trying to indicate. So I've said a lot of words about impermanence and a lot of words about recognizing impermanence. But these words are just meant to be pointers to help you come to a direct experience of impermanence for yourself. So I hope that you've been practicing what I've been saying, because otherwise there's just a bunch of pretty words. And maybe it'll float to the surface of your mind later on in your life and you'll make something of it then. Or maybe it will just lurk in the depths of your subconscious and resurface in a future life. And that's okay, I suppose. There's nothing wrong with that. Taking a very long-term view of things, that's okay. In fact, often that's the best approach, to take the long-term view. But the way I recommend taking the long-term view is to try out these practices. And if you feel like you're not getting anywhere with them, that's okay. Because what you're doing is you're creating the foundation which will allow you to go deep with these practices later in this life or in future lives. So this is a really important thing to keep in mind. So I've encountered a lot of practitioners over the years, including myself at one point in time. I've encountered a lot of practitioners over the years who had this like a nibbana or bust attitude. Like, I'm going to get enlightened in this life. I have to, I must. And on the one hand, I'm like, okay, kudos, bonus points for enthusiasm, maybe so. But on the other hand, I've also seen how that can generate a lot of tension in the mind. It can generate a rather overly tense approach to practice. A rather rigid and unyielding and inflexible approach to practice. And accompanied by this persistent anxiety, like, oh, what if I don't? this persistent anxiety of, oh, maybe I'm not making progress quickly enough. It's like I've been a monk for over 10 years and I'm still not a stream enterer. This is terrible. So bad. Oh, well, on the one hand, yeah, but on the other hand, no, because that's 10 years of setting the conditions for stream entry. That's 10 years of laying the groundwork for stream entry. So I'd encourage that kind of long-term view to our practice. It's like, well, I might not attain the highest goal in this meditation period, in this year, in this decade, in this lifetime. That's okay. I am going to keep laying the groundwork. So it's the same. This meditation practice, the recognition of impermanence, when you're new to it, it can be quite challenging. Yesterday or maybe this morning, somebody mentioned getting bored. Well, getting bored is an indication that you're not practicing the meditation successfully. Because if you're practicing it successfully, then it's incredibly fascinating. So getting bored with the meditation, well, that happens. That happens in the beginning when you're still getting used to it. Another thing which can happen very easily is spacing out or getting distracted. Because if one is not starting with samadhi fixated on a single object, if one is going directly to the recognition of impermanence, then the mind has nothing to stick to, nothing to hold to, and therefore it tends to move around a lot, tends to wander around a lot. So wandering mind or scattered mind is a very common side effect of this meditation method when one is still pretty new to it. Spacing out or dullness or haziness of mind is also a common side effect because, again, it seems often in the beginning there's a feeling of like not really knowing what we're supposed to be doing. So the meditation is actually quite simple. Just whatever the mind is pointed at, recognize that it's impermanent. Whatever the mind is pointed at, know that it's ephemeral, insubstantial. That's it. But that can also lead to this kind of hazy mind of like, everything's ephemeral. Okay, I just take a little nap. And then the bell rings. We're like, oh, peaceful. Yeah. And yeah, okay, it's peaceful, I agree. And naps are great. I love naps. Nothing against naps. But that's not the recognition of impermanence. That's just nodding off, spacing out, zoning out. I remember once a person came to one of our meditation programs. And at the end, I asked him, I was like, oh, how did that go? And he said, it was okay, but I didn't really need to come to this. And I'm like, why not? And he said, well, I already knew how to space out. And I was like, I don't think you quite understood the instructions I was giving. Anyway, so spacing out is not actually what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to be very intently, sharply aware of our experience and sharply aware that it's constantly changing, sharply aware that it's ephemeral, insubstantial, impermanent. So far, I've mostly been talking about doing this during meditation practice, but this is also something you can bring up during your daily life. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever's happening, the moment you remember, remind yourself, this too is impermanent. This experience right now is impermanent. What is it? Are you sitting on the subway, going to work, or maybe to meet with your friends? Well, that's impermanent. Are you reading a book? Maybe you got halfway through a sentence and suddenly you remember anicca, impermanence. And you realize which word you're looking at is impermanent, changes every second. The concepts and imagery flowing through your mind as you read is impermanent. It's changing every moment. Even the experience of the book is impermanent. It wasn't happening a few minutes ago, and it will stop happening in a few minutes. Or even if you're bored, if you're feeling bored, then look at how impermanent boredom is. Sometimes you're bored and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're very bored and sometimes you're slightly bored. Sometimes it's spacey bored and sometimes it's distracted bored. Like, there's a lot of variation there. Sometimes it's grumpy bored, sometimes it's greedy bored. Like, there's all these different kinds of boredom. And if you look at the state of boredom, you'll realize that it's always shifting and flowing between these different varieties of boredom. And as you do that, then the boredom will fade away because now you're interested in the boredom. You're not bored anymore. So that also demonstrates impermanence. When you take an interest in the boredom, then the boredom starts fading. Now, isn't that interesting? And you'll notice how interesting that is, and the boredom fades even more. Not that there's anything wrong with boredom, by the way. It's just another thing that can appear before the mind. It's just another thing that we know is impermanent. It's just another thing that we know does not define us. It's just another temporary experience. It comes and goes like everything else. So remind yourself, as you go throughout your day, you can just constantly bring it to mind, reminding yourself, anicca, anicca, anicca. Impermanence, impermanence, impermanence. Constantly remind yourself. And you'll notice it has a way of breaking through dukkha. It has a way of breaking through agitation. It has a way of breaking through desire. It has a way of breaking through aversion. So whatever state of mind is present, introducing this reminder of impermanence, naturally steers the mind back towards a serene wisdom, this peaceful knowing, naturally inclines the mind towards knowing of the absolute, naturally inclines the mind towards awakening, towards enlightenment, towards nibbana. So I think that's all I'm going to say this evening as a few concluding words to this 6-part series. So once again, I really encourage you to dig deep with this meditation practice. Dig deep with this contemplation. See how far it goes. And you'll see it goes all the way down. All the way down to the depths of our delusion. It can break every single defilement and hindrance it comes across along the way. If we apply it diligently, persistently, honestly, it will break through every single obstacle in our mind. Not necessarily quickly, so you also need to be patient with this practice. If you expect to sit down and immediately get stunning fireworks, well, maybe, but probably not. Be patient. Let it gradually work its way through your mind. It's kind of like water seeping through sand. It takes time, but gradually it soaks all the way through. Gradually, it seeps its way between each grain of sand until it gets all the way through. So you just keep bringing the recognition of impermanence into the mind. And it has its way of gradually soaking through every part of our experience, drenching every part of our experience, working its way deeper and deeper into the mind, transforming the mind from the inside out. So I think I'll go ahead and end at this point. if you have any questions or comments, anything that's come up for you over the last few days as we've been exploring this topic, anything related to the meditation practices we've been doing, now's your opportunity to ask about it. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So we have a question from Bhavani. She says, I would like to understand chantings word by word. How do I go about that?
The Ratana Sutta in particular? I actually gave a talk on the meaning of the Ratana Sutta a few weeks ago, in which I go through it section by section. I don't think I can necessarily go over every single word, but it's a pretty detailed explanation of the sutta. Yeah, I'd recommend look it up. I think it was back in April, possibly. It was closer to the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah, I would look there. Yep.
Thank you. And Art said he is in fact on the other side of the globe. He's in Thailand.
Oh.
And then Mark says, so recently I tried putting my attention somewhere else other than on the breath. My mind became very unhappy about this. Does this mean I should practice being more flexible, or simply that I've got a good thing going and stay with it?
Well, I do think it's good to have a flexible mind. It's good to have the ability to use multiple meditation methods and not rely on only one. But on the other hand, if you get good results with breath meditation, then it's fine to use breath meditation. If you're using the Buddha's 16-step breath meditation, then that's a complete path to liberation. It's a complete meditation practice. It's got everything in it, including anicca sanya, in fact. It's built into the Buddha's 16-step breath meditation. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with using breath meditation if that's what you like. But it is interesting to explore. What is it when you place the mind on a different object? Why does it get unhappy? What's going on there? Is that aversion? Is it confusion? What's going on? So you can still recognize that you like to use the breath and that you do well with the breath, but it's worth exploring. What is this resistance to other objects? What's going on there? Have a closer look at it.
Okay. And then Mark also says, recently I heard Bhante talk about Mahasi Sayadaw and his teachings, and he said that he was responsible for between 500,000 to 1 million students attaining enlightenment. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no. That's called a massive exaggeration. That's what I would say. Theoretically possible, but I think phenomenally unlikely. I've met a number of people over the years who read some Mahasi Sayadaw books, and based on those books, they became convinced that they were enlightened. They weren't. So I think more likely is that somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people think they're enlightened because of reading a book by Mahasi Sayadaw. I think that's much more likely. I strongly doubt that 500,000 people attained enlightenment following Mahasi's instructions. Again, theoretically possible, I just think phenomenally unlikely. I also wonder where he got that number from. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't.
Any thoughts on using the noting technique?
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfectly fine method. My main recommendation is don't use it by itself. Use it as part of a larger toolkit containing many different meditation methods. The main drawback of the noting method is its lack of samadhi. That's actually its number one problem. It is, in fact, a pure vipassana method, which means the mind is constantly moving. Since the mind is constantly moving, it never settles down and unifies. Since it never settles down and unifies, it never develops the serene focus that's needed to probe deeply into the subconscious mind. That said, I have heard of the occasional extremely rare person who gets samadhi using the Mahasi method. So apparently there are some people who have success using it as a standalone method, but that doesn't seem to be the experience of most of the people that I've spoken with. So using samadhi methods to cultivate samadhi, to train the mind to be stabilized, unified, collected, focused. Another very important one is doing metta. So besides wandering restless mind, another thing which only Mahasi practitioners run into is their mind tends to become extremely irritable. There's one young man I know who is actually a very sweet, lovely guy, really good-tempered. And he did a 10-day Mahasi retreat, and by the end of it, he was really grumpy and irritable. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, well, basically, the method was forcing me to come face to face with how unpleasant every moment is. And he's like, so after 10 days, of course I'm grumpy and irritable. So it's really necessary to temper that with the bright, soothing joyfulness of metta practice. And to make sure that we don't start not only getting grumpy within ourselves, but also expressing that in the form of irritability towards other people. So I mean, as a standalone method, not so great, but as a method included in a toolkit of many other methods, it's okay. Yeah. I've practiced it off and on over the years. I've never been a big fan personally, but I can see that it does have some value. The main value that I see in it, by the way, is that it's very good for helping you recognize the impulses of the mind to move around. It's very good at catching the tendency of one's attention to bounce around. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Okay. And Bhavani says, can you suggest a dictionary which can translate each and every word of all chanting? Because I can understand few Pali words, but the translation is different and troubling me.
Send me an email. I'll link you to some Pali resources.
I'll type in the email, actually. Okay, Bhavani, I typed in the email that you can use. And then Helena says, going off Mark's question, if we do notice an aversion to one meditation technique versus another in our practice, is that something to be inquisitive about during that meditation session, or more so after your practice?
Generally speaking, if you've picked a method that you're going to use for a period of meditation, it's good to stick with it. Unless you've been using it for several minutes and it's been an absolute terrible disaster the entire time, then you might give up and do something else. But generally speaking, try to stick with the method. Try to apply the method faithfully, diligently, persistently. Really give it a sincere go. Really do a genuine experiment with it. If you just do something a little bit and then give up, well, then you'll never really know anything about it. You'll never really know what it does or how it affects the mind or what it's good for or what it's not good for. So give it a good solid go. And then afterwards, you might reflect and just see, well, how did that go? And you might be like, well, actually, I didn't like that method so much because of reasons 1, 2, and 3. Or you might be like, well, actually, this method does seem to get good results, but I just don't like it for whatever reason. Or you might be like, the method is okay, but it doesn't seem to work very well for me. Or you might be like, maybe there's something here that I'm just not getting. Maybe I need to ask a teacher for some advice. But try to do that sort of reflection afterwards. If you do it during the meditation, then that means you're not doing the meditation. It means you're doing something else. Those are my thoughts.
And then Bhavani also asks, how can I use impermanence to understand emptiness?
That actually comes naturally. As you develop the perception of impermanence, then you will naturally come to a better understanding of emptiness. Because these concepts are directly related. Through seeing that all things are impermanent and insubstantial, you will naturally come to realize that they're also empty. Emptiness basically means that things cannot be defined as either existing or as not existing. That's basically what emptiness is talking about. So through recognizing that things are impermanent and that therefore they're arising and ceasing in every moment, you can also then recognize that that means they're simultaneously existing and not existing in each moment. So it's the next natural step in one's experiential understanding. But you don't really need to force that step to happen. You just practice anicca sanya. You practice the recognition of impermanence, and that will come on its own. Okay?
Okay. And then Mark asks, have you given any talks on the 16-step breath meditation?
Yeah, just about a week ago, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was part of the Maharahulavada Sutta. Oh, right. Yeah. Is it Maharahulavada Sutta, the second part of it? I go through the 16-step breath meditation. Yeah, I think that was a week ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And specifically, I think it was the last it was 3 or 2 parts.
I think it was 2 parts. So yeah, it was part 2. Part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Mark, you can check last week's sutta study on, what number was it?
62. Maharahulavada Sutta. Okay. The Greater Discourse of Advice to Rahula.
MN 62. The second talk. And it includes all the steps of the 16-step breath meditation. 62, right?
I think so. Any other questions?
And Bhavani asks, can I meditate on the meaning of a chanting?
Well, it depends on the chant. But generally speaking, when we talk about meditation practice, we talk about picking up an object or an attribute and focusing on getting a direct experience of that object or attribute. So, like the Ratana Sutta actually contains a tremendous amount of information about a lot of different things. But it's mostly centered around how amazingly awesome the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha are. And actually, recollection of Buddha, recollection of Dhamma, and recollection of Sangha are 3 meditation methods that you can do. And that involves bringing to mind the various amazing qualities of one of those 3. And cultivating this felt experience of Buddha, or a felt experience of Dhamma, felt experience of Sangha, the wonderful, amazing preciousness of these 3 things. So that is a valid meditation method. It's actually very powerful at bringing up faith and joy in particular. Also a sense of gratitude and appreciation. Yeah.
And then the last question from Bhavani is, are chanting and suttas the same?
So sometimes yes and sometimes no. So the suttas are the discourses given by the Buddha or by the Buddha's direct disciples. And many traditional Buddhist chants are from the suttas. They're excerpts from the Buddhist teachings. But some traditional chants are not from the suttas. They're things that were written later, later centuries. Yeah, so it varies. But usually, even the things that are written in later centuries are based directly on the suttas. Again, not always, but usually. Okay.
So that was the last question for tonight. Jens and Helena say thank you so much. Thanks for your teaching, and that they enjoyed the series on impermanence. So thanks everyone for joining. This is our last live stream for the week, but if you are in the area, tomorrow we'll be doing our regular alms round at West Orange Farmers Market at 9:30 a.m. And then at 6 p.m. we'll have outdoor meditation here at the monastery. So if you are free and would like to come by, please join. Otherwise, next week, Wednesday, we'll resume our live streams with Sutta study and a Dharma talk in the evening. So thanks everyone for joining, and we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.